Now let's create our login page so users can log into our app. We'll begin by creating a pages directory and add our login page. Up at the top of the file, we'll export the function that we'll create with export default. We'll write this as a function declaration, and from it we'll return a component which we'll create called login form. Now we'll add our components directory. We'll add our login form component, and this will be a standard class-based component. We need it to be a class in order to hold on to our form state. We'll say class login form extends react.component. We'll have a render, return, and for the markup for this form, it's going to consist of first a form, and within it a div, which will itself contain an input. And there'll be two inputs, one for email input and one for password input. And then after those inputs, we'll have a button with the type of submit. So our form, in its first input, will have a type of email, and then a name set to email, placeholder email, and an onChange referencing a new function which we'll create called handleChange. Then the password input will have type password, name, password, placeholder, password, and then an onChange of the same function. So we'll use handleChange to update our state, according to the values that are typed into our inputs. So we'll create a state object which will consist of a email and a password property, both set to an empty string initially, and we'll update them using a handleChange, and the onChange handler will give us the event that takes place when there's an onChange event. We'll use the setState method to update the state. We'll update it according to event.target.name, which is the name of the input where we're receiving the change event, and to that given state value, we're going to pass the value of the input, which we get from event.target.value. And for the button, let's just add the text submit. And then on the form itself, we'll add an onSubmit, set it to a function called handleSubmit. And in this function, we'll also receive an event. When our form is sent off, we're going to want to prevent the default action of sending the form, which is to reload the page when making a request to the server. So on the event, we'll call prevent default to prevent the default action of sending the form. And for now, let's just console log our entire state object to see that the values are being updated and that this handleSubmit's working properly. So we'll save everything, and we will open our app in a new browser. So we're getting a 404 error because we're landing on the home page and we've only created a route for the login page. So we'll go to /login, and we'll make sure that we export our login form and import it into the login page. And then when we head back, we should see our form with our email and password inputs. Now if we add an email and password and hit submit, we should see the state object with those values that we typed in, just like we have here. So our state's being updated correctly. Now, normally when it comes to sending off the contents of a form to a backend, which we do here in handleSubmit, we could use an HTTP client like fetch right here within the function, but instead we will create a separate folder called lib, which will hold on to a number of utility functions which will import into this file as well as other ones. So within lib, we'll create a file called auth, and here we will export a new function which we'll create. So we'll say const login user. It will accept two parameters, email and password. And to make a request to our backend with login user, we're going to install a different HTTP client. We're going to be using Axios, and Axios will be used both on our client and on our server to make requests. So we'll end our script. We'll install with npm i Axios, the Axios library, and then we can restart our dev script. So we'll bring in Axios up at the top here. Import Axios from Axios. In order to make our request, since Axios is promise-based, we'll write this as an async await function. So we'll, before our parameters, include the keyword async, and we'll say await axios.post. We want to make a post request, and this will be very useful in using Axios. All of its methods will be identical to the route methods that we're going to be using on our backend. So we're going to make a post request, and here in our first argument we need to specify the route. What route on our backend do we want to make a request to? Well, we haven't created a route yet. We will in just a second, but this route will be /API/login. And since we're making a post request and we're trying to log in a user with their credentials, we're going to need to provide a payload where we'll pass in an object which will consist of the email and password that we're getting from the form. And then, since we're using async await, we'll get back a response in a variable which we'll call response. And Axios is very convenient. We don't have to go through as many steps in getting the data back as we do, say, with the fetch API. All we need to do is, from this response object that's returned, to get the data, just say response.data. Or we can even, in just one line, get back the data by destructuring the response that comes back. So we can destructure that immediately. And for now, let's just console log the data that we get. So then in login form, we'll bring in login user, the login user function from our lib folder, from lib/auth. Then within handle submit, you can just take login user and pass it the email and password values. So we'll destructure our state object to get those. And we'll pass through email and password. And then we need to handle this request on our backend. So we need to make this /API/login route. So above our getAll, our catch-all route, we're going to say server.post to handle a post request, the post request that's being made when we send our form. The route is going to be exactly the same, /API/login. But in order to handle the JSON data that's going to be passed through to server.post to be able to handle form data, we need to use a piece of middleware. And middleware are basically just functions that are executed as an intermediary step, say before we execute this post handler. So in order to tell Express how to handle the JSON data that's coming in order to parse it, or to parse really the form bodies that are coming in, we're going to say server.use. Use is a method used specifically for Express middleware. We're going to say server.use, and from Express, from the Express package, we're given a method called JSON, which tells Express how to work or parse JSON data. So if you've used Express previously, you might have installed a package like body parser in order to do this parsing of request bodies. However, now it's built into Express since Express 4.16. So now in our handler, in our function that's going to handle the request that's coming in, we get a request and a response. Now we can take the data which will be put on the request, specifically on request.body. We can grab the email and password values. So we can destructure those. Since this is just an object, we can destructure email and password from request.body, and then we can just send that back to our client. We can send back some JSON data with res or response.json, and here we can just write a basic object which will be received by our login user function as JSON data. So we can say, we can just echo this. We can pass in email, password, and let's say success set to true. Now we'll save everything and test this out. We'll head to our browser. Let's just provide an email and a password, and we hit submit. We get the email and the password echoed back to us from the server, and success set to true.